I didn't fully understand the relevance of this particular song, nor did I understand the words because I was just too young to get it. Plus, I was too busy listening to everything else. Hello, everybody. My name is Bishop Friesch, and I want to welcome you to My Life Through Music. So, in my room, I've got this big stack of albums and 45s that my mom had left in there. And I had already gone through the Beatles, and I was looking for another song. And what I found was this wild song called Ball of Confusion, That's What the World Is Today by The Temptations. Again, this also was released in 1970 as well. And when I heard it, I was absolutely floored. I mean, I couldn't believe it. This song had literally everything. I mean, first you have the count-in, they counted off. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. And they're like, ow. And then you got the bass, and it's a very popular bass line. And then you got this guitar sound that kind of almost echoes off into the distance. And then they start singing, and you got these strange sounds going on. And when you listen to this with headphones, you got sounds in one ear and not the other. And you've got sounds going from one ear to the other. It is just wild, and it was awesome. And then you've got the horns, they come in. And not to mention some very nice percussion work in the background. And when you get to the chorus, it's almost like everything just kind of comes to a peak, and it just gets funky and soulful, and they just start flowing, and it's just like, man. So as I mentioned before, this song being released in 1970, and what are they talking about? I mean, listen to it and look at the words. And I want to go through, the song quickly. But before I do, I just want to ask a question. And this is a question that a sociology instructor that I had used to ask us before we went into this thing called an exercise, is what he called it. And what he did was randomly, he would just have us stop what we're doing, whether we were in group work or having a discussion. He would just stop, and he would go into this exercise. And what it was a series of very pointed, very controversial, and even personal questions that he would ask us, and they would probably be yes or no, and that's how you answered. You'd answer by raising your hand, and you didn't have to answer the question, but he would encourage us to answer the question, but he would say it, throughout the exercise. He'd say, now remember, you don't have to answer the question in front of the class if you don't want to, but all I ask is that you are honest with yourself. And that's kind of what I want to do as we go through this song. I mean, it is controversial, and it can be personal, and they are, some very, topics that are uncomfortable to talk about. And so all I ask is that be honest with yourself. And I guarantee that when you are in anything, not just this, but in anything, you start to learn so much more about yourself. So in this song, right from the beginning, you got people moving out, people moving in. Why? Because of the color of their skin. I mean, look at this. Right off the bat, you've got race relations, race concerns. And then a little bit further down, it's an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. I mean, I didn't know what that meant at the time at such a young age, but as I got older and studied more, they were talking about that then, and do people still have that mindset today? Just a question. And then you've got vote for me and I'll set you free. And again, here we are, it's March 2020, and what's happening in November? We've got an election, so I think it's kind of interesting. Vote for me and I'll set you free. They were talking about it then. And then as you go down, the writer of this song has this series of well-placed words that I don't think they're in this order just randomly. I could be wrong. But if you look at them, look at what is going on here. Segregation, determination, demonstration, integration, aggravation, humiliation, obligation to our nation. Now pause right there. When you go through those words, I want to consider the perspective of an African American person in 1970. I mean, think about that. It's wild, and they're talking about this stuff in 1970. I mean, obviously, that was a very huge, situation there. Then it goes into the sale of pills is at an all-time high. I mean, they were talking about it then. Young folks walking around with their heads in the sky. I mean, I can talk about that forever. I got 2 teenagers. Cities aflame in the summertime. I don't know if that might be kind of metaphorical, but it says after that, and the beat goes on. I mean, what does that mean? To me, it could mean, I don't know for sure, but it could mean that either let's keep this going, on the side of maybe the media or the news or advertising or money or greed or leaders at various levels, and the beat goes on. Let it keep going. Or it could be an observation that, hey, this stuff just keeps on going on. I don't know. I'm just thinking, out loud. And then it goes into eve of destruction. Pause right there. It's March 13th, 2020. And right now, globally, we are dealing with something very serious. I'm not going to go into it, but eve of destruction. What was the eve of destruction in 1970? I don't know. I wasn't born then, but I'm sure there was something. I'm sure there was something in 1980. I'm sure there was something in 1990. Definitely 2000. I mean, I remember Y2K. And I'm not making light of this. I'm just saying that there seems to always be an eve of destruction. City inspectors, bill collectors, I mean, that's always been going on. Politicians say more taxes will solve everything. Again, I don't know. I don't care how you come down on that issue. But, I mean, they were talking about it in 1970. And then round and round and round we go. Where the world's headed, nobody knows. And then you get this wild line. Great Googa Mooga, can't you hear me talking to you? And of course, when I was listening to this at this particular time, I had no idea what that was. I had no idea what they were talking about. I didn't even know that that's what they were saying. I just assumed that it was just some funky way to spit out a line. I had no idea. But as I got older, there was ways to look this stuff up, and I looked at that, and it looks like that it's probably just an expression that was used in the 1950s and the 1960s. And then you come down, you got fear in the air, tension everywhere. Again, going back to that eve of destruction. Unemployment rising fast. I think every generation deals with that. The Beatles knew records of gas. And I thought that was kind of funny as I was going through this. Which record they were referring to, I can't be sure. But I remembered that the previous video, I talked about the Beatles, and that's just pure coincidence. I just thought it was kind of funny. And then it says, and the only safe place to live is on an Indian reservation. That's pretty profound. What does that mean? And there it is again. And the band played on. What does that mean? What does that mean to you? Again, eve of destruction, tax deduction. We go back to that. City inspectors, bill collectors. They talk about clothing, the dress of the day. Population out of hand. Has that ever come up? Suicide. Too many bills. I mean, these are things that they were talking about back then. And are we talking about those same things today? People all over the world are shouting, "End the war." And there it is again. And the band played on. What war? Again, this is 1970, so I think it's safe to assume that they were talking about the Vietnam War. That was obviously going on at the time. But what about today? I'm positive that in many places in the world, there are still people shouting, "End the war." I mean, the world's a big place, and we're connected to each other like we've never have been before. The entire planet. And I think it's important to understand that in 1970, they were talking about that war. Today, what other wars are going on? What war could we be referring to? Because there's one going on somewhere. And I'm sure there are people shouting, "End the war." And I think it's important that we remember those people and keep them in mind. Ball of confusion. That's what the world is today. That's what they said in 1970. Do we say that today? I don't know. I've got my own ideas. I'm asking you. I mean, take a look at it now. Again, it's 2020. What, if anything, has changed in 50 years? Are we not still talking about these very same issues today? Have they changed? And if they have, how have they changed? Has any of them gotten better? Or has any of them gotten worse? Maybe some aspects of these, the sub-aspects, maybe some of them have gotten better in degrees. Maybe they've gotten worse in degrees. But most importantly, we're still talking about them. Isn't that crazy? 50 years later. I don't think that there is a quick and easy answer to that. I mean, these are very complex and very compounded issues, but we just can't ignore them. Again, regardless of how we feel about each of these subjects and each of these issues, I believe that beyond that, it's even more important to know why you feel the way you do about them. And once you understand why you feel that way, I think it's important that you live that way and live by that example. And if you can, make a change in your small circle of influence, if you can, when you can. But do it with consideration for others and respect. But at the end of the day, I think we should realize that the only real control that we have is over ourselves and not really over others. And with that understanding, I think it's possible to actually go through this life with a little less confusion. And this is why this song is where it's at in my Life Through Music playlist. I have put the link to the song at the bottom so you can, at your convenience, go listen to it. I highly encourage you to. Please do. And just as you do, consider a lot of the questions that were raised in our little discussion here. And just think about them and be honest and figure out where you stand on these things, why you stand, and live it. As always, I want to thank you so much for your time. I know it's valuable, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks.